At the family reunion, my uncle announced, "I owe it all to my sons. My nephew never had what it takes." Everyone clapped. I stood up, handed him a wrapped box and said, "From your disappointment." Then I left. My name is Damon Ravenstone. I'm 34 years old and I run Crimson Tech Solutions, a cybersecurity consulting firm based in Portland, Oregon. What started as a routine family gathering at Willowbrook Estate turned into the moment I'd been waiting for since childhood. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I'd finally gathered the evidence to expose the truth about my uncle's success. The annual Ironwood family reunion was held every Labor Day weekend at Magnus Ironwood's sprawling estate in the hills outside Portland. 53 family members gathered to celebrate another year of prosperity, most of it generated by Magnus's construction empire, Ironwood Industries. Magnus had built his reputation as the family patriarch through 30 years of aggressive business expansion and equally aggressive self-promotion. Every year, his reunion speech followed the same pattern, crediting his success to hard work, family values, and the achievements of his two sons, Jasper and Kieran. This year felt different from the moment I arrived. The usual polite greetings from relatives carried an underlying tension, whispered conversations that stopped when I approached, knowing looks exchanged between Magnus and his inner circle. "Damon, glad you could make it," Magnus said when I found him holding court on the estate's main terrace. "We were just discussing the new downtown development project. Real business, you know. Not like that computer stuff you mess around with." I smiled and nodded, accustomed to his dismissive comments about my work in cybersecurity. Magnus had never understood technology, preferring concrete and steel to algorithms and encryption. The gathering proceeded normally until Magnus called for attention to deliver his traditional speech. The family assembled on the terrace as he positioned himself in front of the stone fireplace, wine glass raised in toast position. "Another successful year for the Ironwood family," he began, launching into his familiar narrative about building something meaningful through traditional values and honest work. Then came the part I'd been expecting. "I owe everything I've accomplished to my sons," Magnus declared, gesturing toward Jasper and Kieran. "They understand what it means to build something real, something lasting. My nephew Damon, well, he's chosen a different path. Technology consulting, they call it, but he never had what it takes for real business." The family applauded, some enthusiastically, others awkwardly. I remained seated, calculating the perfect moment for what I'd planned. "Stand up, Damon," Magnus continued, emboldened by the positive response. "Tell everyone about your little computer business. Maybe they'll understand it better than I do." I stood slowly, reaching into my jacket for the wrapped box I'd prepared. The room fell silent as I approached Magnus with what appeared to be a gift. "Uncle Magnus, you're absolutely right about me never having what it takes," I said clearly, ensuring everyone could hear. "This is from your biggest disappointment." I handed him the box and turned to leave. As I walked toward the exit, I could hear Magnus tearing at the wrapping paper behind me, curiosity overcoming his usual caution. The screaming started before I reached my car. 3 months earlier, I'd received an unexpected call from Nova Starweaver at Starweaver Investigations. Nova specialized in corporate intelligence and had been monitoring unusual activity in Portland's construction industry. "Damon, your cybersecurity expertise might be relevant to something I'm investigating," she'd explained during our meeting at a downtown coffee shop. "There's been systematic bid manipulation in public construction contracts, and the digital trail suggests sophisticated coordination." She'd shown me encrypted communications between contractors, evidence of price-fixing schemes, and documentation of bribes paid to city officials. The scope was staggering, involving over $40 million in fraudulent contracts over 5 years. The most damaging evidence involved Magnus Ironwood. Subscribe to see what was in that box. Ironwood Industries had been winning public contracts through a combination of insider information and coordinated bid suppression. Magnus received advance details about project specifications, then shared that intelligence with a network of contractors who agreed to submit artificially high competing bids. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its scope. Magnus had built his reputation and wealth through systematic fraud while positioning himself as a pillar of business integrity. Nova's investigation had been commissioned by the FBI's Public Corruption Unit, which was building a federal case against the entire network. They needed digital forensics expertise to trace the electronic communications and financial transfers that proved the conspiracy. That's where my little computer business became relevant. Over 6 weeks, I analyzed thousands of emails, tracked cryptocurrency transactions, and reconstructed the digital architecture of Magnus's bid rigging operation. The evidence was overwhelming and legally bulletproof. More personally satisfying was discovering how Magnus had financed his son's business ventures. Jasper's commercial real estate firm and Kieran's development company weren't successful due to their business acumen. They were successful because Magnus had steered fraudulently obtained contracts to their projects, artificially inflating their property values and ensuring their profitability. The Ironwood family success story was built on a foundation of systematic criminal activity. The wrapped box I'd given Magnus contained printed copies of every incriminating document, along with a USB drive containing the complete digital evidence package. But the real surprise was the note attached to the inside lid. Federal agents will arrive at 9 a.m. Monday to execute search warrants. Thought you should know. Your disappointing nephew. The screaming I'd heard was Magnus realizing that his entire empire was about to collapse, and that the family member he'd dismissed as worthless had been instrumental in exposing his crimes. Monday morning brought exactly what I'd promised. FBI agents executed simultaneous raids on Ironwood Industries, Magnus's estate, and the offices of 12 co-conspirator companies. The investigation made front-page news across Oregon, with Magnus's arrest photo prominently featured. Sage Moonfall, my younger brother who worked as a journalist for the Portland Tribune, called me that afternoon. "Damon, the FBI raid on Magnus is all over the news. Did you know this was coming? I had some advance information about federal investigations into construction contract irregularities. This is huge. Magnus is facing federal conspiracy charges and they're saying it could be 15 years in prison." The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Magnus pleaded guilty to conspiracy, fraud, and bribery charges. His cooperation with federal prosecutors helped dismantle the entire bid-rigging network, but couldn't save him from a 12-year federal prison sentence. Jasper and Kieran, despite their claims of ignorance, were indicted as co-conspirators. Their businesses had been too closely integrated with Magnus's schemes for plausible deniability. Both eventually pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. The family's reaction was predictably mixed. Some relatives, particularly those who'd benefited financially from Magnus's success, blamed me for destroying the family's reputation and wealth. Others who'd always suspected something was wrong with Magnus's rapid rise quietly thanked me for exposing the truth. Iris Silverbrook, a family friend who'd known Magnus for decades, approached me at the courthouse during one of his hearings. "Damon, I know this wasn't easy for you. Magnus always treated you poorly, but you could have just walked away instead of getting involved in the investigation." Walking away would have meant letting the fraud continue. Other contractors were being cheated, taxpayers were being robbed, and Magnus was using his illegal profits to humiliate family members who actually worked honestly. How long did you know? I suspected something for years. Magnus's success never made sense given the quality of his work and his business practices. But I didn't have proof until Nova brought me the digital evidence. 6 months after Magnus's sentencing, I received a letter from him in federal prison. The tone was dramatically different from his usual arrogance. He acknowledged that his treatment of me had been unfair and apologized for publicly diminishing my achievements. He'd had time to reflect on how his criminal activity had harmed not just his business partners and taxpayers, but his own family's reputation and relationships. The letter concluded with something I'd never expected to hear from Magnus. Respect for the work I'd done in exposing his crimes and recognition that my cybersecurity expertise had been more valuable than he'd ever understood. I didn't respond to the letter, but I kept it as a reminder that truth eventually surfaces, regardless of how successfully people think they've hidden it. 1 year after the family reunion, I was testifying before a congressional committee about cybersecurity measures for preventing public contract fraud. The case against Magnus had become a model for federal prosecution of digital-age corruption schemes. During the hearing, a committee member asked about my motivation for becoming involved in the investigation. "Mr. Ravenstone, you could have simply provided technical expertise and remained anonymous. Why did you choose to take such a public role in exposing your own family member?" I thought about Magnus's dismissive comments over the years, his public humiliation at family gatherings, his assumption that technology work wasn't real business. Congressman, fraud damages everyone in a community, but it particularly harms honest businesses trying to compete fairly. When someone uses their reputation for integrity to cover criminal activity, exposing that hypocrisy becomes a public service. And the personal aspect, this was your uncle. The personal aspect made it more important, not less. Magnus used family gatherings to promote himself as a successful businessman and role model. Children in our family looked up to him. They deserved to know that real success comes from honest work, not criminal schemes. After the hearing, Tempest Goldleaf, the attorney who'd helped me navigate the legal complexities of the investigation, made an observation that stayed with me. "Damon, you realize that Magnus's dismissive attitude toward your work is what made his downfall possible. If he'd understood cybersecurity, he would have been more careful about creating digital evidence." She was right. Magnus's arrogance about technology had been his weakness. He'd assumed that complex financial crimes could be conducted through digital communications without leaving traces that someone with my expertise could follow. His contempt for my profession had blinded him to its investigative applications. 2 years later, Crimson Tech Solutions had grown to 35 employees and was handling cybersecurity consulting for major corporations and government agencies. The publicity from the Magnus case had established my reputation as someone who could uncover sophisticated digital fraud schemes. I was reviewing proposals for expanding our services when Sage called with news about Magnus. "Damon, Magnus was released on early parole for cooperation with ongoing federal investigations. He's living in a halfway house in Seattle and working at a community center teaching job skills to ex-offenders. How's he adjusting?" According to his parole officer, he's been a model inmate and seems genuinely remorseful about his crimes. He's also been asking family members about contacting you. I considered this information while watching the sunset from my office in Cedar Hills. Magnus had lost everything: his business, his wealth, his reputation, and 12 years of freedom. The man who'd once dismissed me as worthless was now living in supervised housing, working for minimum wage. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I felt no satisfaction in his suffering. The investigation had been about justice and protecting future victims, not personal revenge. That evening, I called Iris Silverbrook to ask her opinion about possibly meeting with Magnus. "Damon, he's genuinely changed. Prison and losing everything he'd built illegally gave him perspective he never had before. He understands now that his success was hollow because it was built on lies." What would he want to discuss? Redemption, I think. Making amends for how he treated people, particularly you. He knows he can't undo the damage, but he wants to try. 3 weeks later, I drove to Seattle to meet Magnus at the community center where he worked. He looked older, thinner, genuinely humbled by his experiences. We talked for 2 hours about the investigation that had changed both our lives. Magnus accepted full responsibility for his crimes and acknowledged that his treatment of family members had reflected his own insecurity about his illegitimate success. "I understand now why you did what you did," he said quietly. "The investigation was about protecting people from my crimes, not hurting me personally." "Success earned through fraud isn't success at all," I replied. "I know that now. It took losing everything to understand the difference." As I drove back to Portland that evening, I realized the family reunion confrontation had taught us both important lessons. The wrapped box hadn't just contained evidence of crimes. It had contained proof that the family member he'd dismissed as worthless had become exactly the person capable of holding him accountable. Sometimes the best surprise you can give someone who underestimates you is showing them what you accomplish when they're not paying attention.